Hello and welcome to the BYU Family History Library webinar series. We're glad you could join us today. I'm Bryant and I'll be your host for this webinar. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box and I can address your concerns. You are welcome to use the chat box during the webinar for comments, insights, and questions. However, all questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Our next webinar is next week on Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. the same time on April 7th, and that will be with Kathryn Grant. And we will get you the details on the title of the webinar and the topic next week. If you would like to access a previous webinar, please visit our webinar index on our website or search on our YouTube channel. All of our webinars are recorded and uploaded by the following Monday for your convenience. We also post links to recordings and other updates on our Facebook and Twitter accounts. For today's webinar, we are pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant, who will be giving a FamilySearch Q&A session. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn began doing family history. Somewhat to her surprise, she discovered that she loved it. Her specialty is helping new family historians find success, and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library, at other family history events. Her column on family history ran in the Nauvoo Times for about a year, and is still available online. In addition, she's a regular contributor to the FamilySearch blog. Kathryn works as a technical writer and instructional designer with a focus on usability and process improvement. Her current work assignment includes developing training used on mobile devices. Besides family history, she loves uplifting music, thought-provoking books, and springtime. And Kathryn, if you're ready, we'll turn the time over to you.
Wonderful. Bryant, thank you so much. Let me just, oh, do you know what? It says that screen sharing is disabled. Could you enable that for me?
My bad, yeah, you should be able to now.
Cool. Thank you so much. Let's see. Oh, I just got a message in the Q&A that the volume doesn't sound good. So is that better? I moved my microphone a little closer to my mouth. I hope that helps. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Yes. Okay, everybody, I hope you can see my slide, my first slide. If you can't, let me know. But I am so excited for this webinar today. Honestly, the Q&As are one of my favorite types of webinars to give. In fact, in our Sunday classes, the Q&A sessions at the end are always my favorite part. I just love the questions because I feel like that gives the participants, you as attendees, the chance to ask the questions that are most important to you. I'll tell you a little bit ahead of time that we got so many questions this time that we won't be able to get through all of them. So Bryant and I were actually talking about doing another Q&A session to answer these questions and the ones that we're not going to be able to answer today. So if your question isn't answered today, I will either answer you privately by email or we will save it till the next Q&A session. But I just want you to know that we really, really appreciate all the questions that were submitted, and they were really, really good questions. So just by way of an introduction, I wanted to clarify the types of questions that we'll be talking about in this webinar today. So questions about FamilySearch.org, we'll be focusing on those. And then also general questions about family history, but particularly as they tie into FamilySearch.org. The one thing we don't want to do on these webinars, just because we don't have either the time or the expertise in some cases, and that is questions about specific research. So as an example, a question such as how do I do a merge in family tree is a great question for this webinar because it's general. It would appeal to a broad number of the audience members. But on the other hand, we probably wouldn't cover a question that is very specific like this. I'm trying to find the biological parents of James Brown, my fifth great grandfather who was adopted as a child. As you can imagine, that would be a lot more difficult to answer and probably wouldn't apply broadly to most members of the audience that are here for the webinar. So that's what we're looking at. And then we will just go ahead and go through all the questions that we have time for. And I picked 10 of the questions out of all those that were submitted that I felt would probably be the most relevant to the most people. But if we get done before our hour is up, then we'll open it up for any additional questions that participants have, especially if you have follow-up questions to anything that we've talked about today. So our first question is a great question, and it's one that comes up all the time. And so this person asked, what is the difference between Family Search and Family Tree? Really good question. Family Search refers to the whole FamilySearch.org website, while Family Tree is the section of the website where we're building a shared tree of the human family. It probably is easier to visualize if we look at the menu. This on FamilySearch.org. This is one thing I love about FamilySearch.org, among many things, is that they make the organization of the site very clear. So on the FamilySearch.org website, on almost every page, you're going to see this top menu that gives you the main sections of the Family Search website. So we're not going to go through the others because that wasn't the scope of this question, but you can see that the first item on the menu is Family Tree. And when you click that, you get taken to the part of the website where we're building that shared tree of the human family. So once again, great question. I can't even count the number of times that this question has come up in previous classes. So this was a very relevant question. And sometimes we say family search when we actually mean family tree. And it's just good, I think, to have it distinct in our minds what the difference is so that we can speak accurately, because it's always less confusing if we can use the appropriate terms for things. So thanks for that great question. And on to question 2, which kind of ties into question 1 actually. Can you have separate trees in Family Tree on FamilySearch.org? And that is a very valid question because on most websites, family history websites that allow trees, you actually can have separate trees. So for instance, MyHeritage, Find My Past, Ancestry.com, and others, or if you have a desktop program such as Ancestral Quest or Roots Magic, of course you have your own separate tree in those instances. But the purpose of Family Search was actually not to allow members to have their own separate trees, but rather to have us all collaborate on one shared tree of the human family. So the answer is no, you cannot have your own tree for deceased family members, but like most things, it's never quite as simple as it might seem on the surface, right? So for privacy reasons, any living people on your tree are essentially in your quote own tree until they're marked deceased. Once again, it's always helpful to have some kind of a visual, at least for me, to kind of help me know what we're talking about here. So in this particular pedigree, we've got orange people that are marked living, and we have blue people that are considered deceased. And so the deceased people, the blue people, are visible to every user of Family Tree. But when you sign into Family Tree, only you can see the living people that are part of your tree. But like here on this example, let's just say that grandpa recently passed away and then we mark him deceased. Well, as soon as we mark him deceased, he becomes visible to everybody else in the tree. So I hope that helps explain that, yeah, you can't really have your own separate tree in Family Tree, and especially not for deceased people, but your living relatives are kind of in their own tree until you mark them deceased. Okay, question number 3, again, kind of building off of the questions that we've just had. What is the procedure when you created a living family member in Family Tree, but now they're deceased? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Here's the procedure. The first thing that you do is add the person's death information. So you'd click edit by their death information, and then you'd add whatever death information you have, hopefully a death date and a death place. And the minute you save that information, that person becomes visible to all other people. So they're kind of now in that shared tree. Before, they were really in the shared tree, but they were hidden because they were living and they were only visible to you. But now that they've passed away and you mark them deceased, they become visible in the shared tree. Then the most important thing, and you actually could have done this before you added the death information, but at some point you want to attach sources for the death if at all possible, because it's so important to add those sources to people in family trees so that other users know that the information we've provided is trustworthy. And then finally, there's a good chance if you created a living member and then mark them deceased, that at some point there's going to be duplicates. Let's say, for example, that my grandmother died, and both my cousin and I had a record for our grandmother in our own separate trees. So there would be two copies of grandma. Well, as soon as my cousin and I mark each of our copies of grandma deceased, they both show up in the tree. So then at that point, we would need to merge any duplicate copies that there were. And the talking about merges is beyond the scope of this webinar, but if you'd like a detailed explanation and a demo of merging, then look for this webinar. It's on YouTube and it's also on our family history, BYU Family History Library webinar index page. So honestly, the fastest way to find it is either go out to YouTube and search for duplicates in Family Tree Part 2, or just Google it, duplicates in Family Tree Part 2, and one of the top results will be the BYU Family History Libraries webinar index page. That's a long title, huh? But I hope that made sense. So either go to YouTube and search, or just Google the name of this webinar and you'll be able to find the recording. Question number 4. How do I restore a person that was deleted by another user? Well, in order to answer that question, it's super important to realize that people can only be directly deleted, number one, by the original creator. So the person who originally added that person to Family Tree, and only if no other users have made changes. So I actually tried this out. I have two FamilySearch accounts. I have a public one for testing purposes, and then I have the one that's tied to my Church of Jesus Christ membership. So I created a person with one of the accounts, and then I made some changes, and then I tried to delete them, and I was able to do that. But I then I created a person and went to my other account, and oh, excuse me, I need to go back. I created a person, made some changes, and then went to my other account and made some more changes. Then I tried to delete the person and I couldn't delete them anymore because somebody other than the original creator had made changes to that person. So I hope that's clear, you guys. Again, to summarize, you can, if you've created a person, you're the only one who can delete them, and you can only delete them as long as you're the only person who has made any changes to that record. The minute another user in Family Tree makes changes, none of you can delete that person. Now, that being said, again, this is another example when things aren't quite as simple as you might think on the surface. People can also be, quote, deleted by any user as part of a merge. So if you remember, picture in your mind the merge screen. You've got the surviving person on one side, and you've got the person to be merged into that person on the other side. And FamilySearch calls that person the deleted person. But deleted people aren't really deleted. It's a better word to say that they're just archived. In other words, if someone has been, quote, deleted, you can still see their record as long as you know the PID. So let's look at that, and the PID or the ID number. So if you know the ID number, for instance, maybe you created the person and then you did a merge. And so you know what the ID number is, but that person, for all intents and purposes, is deleted right now. Well, you click find, and then you click find by ID. So you're searching by ID. and you bring up the deleted record and you would see something very similar to this. Well, on the right-hand side in kind of tiny little writing, there's a restore person link, and you would click that link and it would allow you to bring back that deleted or archived person. But what if you don't know the PID? What if somebody else did the merge and you just know that there used to be somebody by this name, but you don't know the ID? Well, what you can do is go to the change log of the surviving person. And here's an example down here. So this Betty Ainsworth had a lot of merges done on her. So I needed to undo some of them because they weren't all correct. And so I would go to the merge that wasn't correct, and then I would click the deleted person. And then, of course, you get the summary card for the person and you click their name again. Then that gets you to the same deleted page like we saw here. And then you would again just hit restore person, and that would bring back that deleted person. Okay, question number 5. I need to take a little drink here, excuse me, a drink of water. Okay, question 5. Very good question. Why does Family Search use the US, the United States, four-level place name standard, which is city, county, state, country, for other countries? And in order to be sure that I was giving correct information on this webinar, I actually contacted the person at Family Search who is in charge. There's actually a couple of people on the team that deal with the place names. And so the first question I asked them was, is this really true that Family Search kind of enforces or uses the United States standard on all other countries? And they told me, actually, that's not the case. Family Search adapts place names to the applicable time period and to the country. So they get very specific on a couple of levels because as we all know, boundaries change over time. So you can't just say, this is the place name for once and for all, because sometimes, for instance, what's a good example? The what used to be called Czechoslovakia, the boundaries have changed over there. So what was a correct place name back in, say, the 1960s or 1970s would not be a correct place name today. So Family Search has this huge database of all these place names in the world, not only today, but in past history as much as they can determine them. So for example, I went to a christening record and or excuse me, I went to a person and I went into their christening information to edit it. And I just typed the name Kernbach. Well, when I did that, all these different options for Kernbach came up. And you notice the first one, we've got 5 levels. In the next one, we've got 6 levels. In the next one, we've got 4 levels. So Family Search will display, if you just type in a place, they will display a number of matches, and then you need to use your research background and also the time period of the person that you're adding the christening to pick the correct place name. Now, that being said, is the place database of Family Search perfect? No, and they would be the first to admit that it's not perfect. So for more information, to see the information that Family Search has right now in their place name database, you would go to this URL. So it's familysearch.org/research/places. This is the coolest website, I've got to tell you. This will give you not only information about place names in the Family Search database, but a whole bunch of other information. Like it will link you to Wikipedia articles. It will show you where it is on the map, all these different things. So this, I would definitely recommend bookmarking this place. And you see here, I searched for Amstelveen, where I used to live as a child, and I got 3 different options here. And if I were to click on any of those options, I would get more information about that particular option. Now, back to the question of what if you absolutely know that you've got a place name that is not included in the Family Search database? Then you've got this button up here to suggest a new place. And when you click that, it brings up a form that lets you supply all the information that will help Family Search either realize that maybe it's in the database, but it wasn't spelled correctly or whatever it might be, or they might look and go, wow, we really don't have that in our database and it needs to be added. And so by that, we as users can constantly help improve the Family Search place name database. So that was a great question. Okay, on to question 6. I also love this question because it is a question that comes up all the time. As Bryant mentioned, I teach Sunday classes at the BYU Family History Library and teach at other family history events wherever. And this just comes up all the time, especially for those of us who, as this questioner said, come from a family with many genealogy enthusiasts. So we open up Family Tree and we look at our tree and it is so worked over. Like we look at it and we can't even see any place where we might be able to make a contribution. So in this question, I had to make an assumption. Actually, let me take that back. I realized that the questioner could be asking with one of two things in mind. They could either be asking because they want to help build their tree, even though it looks pretty full, or they want to know what else they could do besides building their tree to be involved in family history. So actually, I'm going to answer both of those questions just so that I hit both possibilities for that person. So if everybody's worked your tree over, but you still want to contribute to the tree, consider doing descendancy research. What is descendancy research? Let's take a look. So in order to understand what it is, let's look first at what traditional or ancestral research is. It is tracing lines back in time from parent to parent to parent. So as an example, you would start with yourself and then you would trace back to your dad, to your mom, then you would trace back to grandma and grandpa and to your greats and on back. On your dad's side, you would do the same thing on your mother's side until you couldn't trace back any further. You'd either run into brick walls that you couldn't get past or the records have stopped. So that's traditional ancestral research, just going back in time. But descendancy research, you started out the same way. So you trace a line back until you get to an ancestral couple, and then you basically do a U-turn. So in this example, I've gone to my dad, to his mother, to her mother, dot, 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 to a direct line ancestral couple. Then I forgot I had this little message here. What you want to do generally is go back to about the 1800s or the late 1700s. You probably don't want to go too much further back than that for a couple of reasons. One is that records tend to be a lot harder to read back then and a lot less available. And then also, shoot, I just forgot what the other reason is. I had it in my brain. Um, Let me think. I can't remember it. If it comes back to me, I will say what it was. But you'll find it's just easier a lot of times to stick in the time period where records are available and readable. And so go to the early 1800s or the late 1700s, whatever that is for your age. For people that are younger, that were born maybe say 20 years ago, they're going to be able to go back more generations than those of us who are older and it takes us less generations to get back to the 1800s or the late 1700s. So once you get there, you do a U-turn. And so I've indicated in red what my direct line is. But not only can you do your direct line, you can do all the siblings of this ancestral couple. So I can do all these people. I can then do all their children, their children's children, their children's children. And I can do that for everybody down until you hit the privacy period. The privacy period is 110 years from today's date. So there, FamilySearch has a rule that you can't submit names less than 110 years, and I'm speaking of temple work here actually, you're not supposed to submit names for temple work if they were born less than 110 years. And so to do this descendancy research, normally the reason a person wants to do that is to find names for the temple. And so you need to stop, excuse me, you need to stop when you start reaching people that were born within the last 110 years. I hope that makes sense, you guys. If it doesn't, please ask a question in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll address those questions at the end. Okay, what if the person who asked this question wasn't talking about a tree? What if they wanted to know, hey, what else can I do? I realize my tree is full. I'd like to be involved in other activities. Here are some of the most common that you could do. They're not by any means all activities, but they're a pretty good sampling of the types of things that you could do to be involved in family history. So one is to write your own family history or to write the family history of a family member like your parent or your grandparent. And that's a little bit poignant for me right now because my mom has developed dementia. And we would always ask her, please, can we write your history? And she'd say, no, no, no. And so I wish now that she just doesn't remember so many things. And I wish that I'd either been more insistent or that I had just started writing it and would then be able to ask her questions. As it is now, I'm going to have to go off my memory. And my dad, fortunately, he isn't suffering from dementia, so he can fill in a lot of gaps. But my point is, there will be a point when it's too late to write somebody's history or too late to ask them in person and get information from them to write their family history. You can still write a family history of somebody who's deceased because you can look at sources, you can talk to people who knew them if they're still alive. So there's still hope, but I'm just saying if you have the chance to write a history or stories about somebody who's living right now, take advantage of that and definitely write your own story because someday somebody is going to want to read that story and that your story. And that someday may come sooner than you think. Maybe somebody will contact you because they are going through a discouraging time. And because you've written your story, you can send them a story that will help encourage them. So definitely look at options for writing your own story and the stories, the family histories of other people in your family. Another thing is to gather and organize photos. Again, that's a kind of thing with an expiration date on it because how many of us have photos that we have not put any information on, whether they're paper photos or digital? So if we suddenly, heaven forbid, passed away or whatever, and somebody else got all our photos, would they know who all those people are? So it's a good thing to gather and organize our photos. And if they're in paper, we should make some kind of archival safe note. So we want to be very careful if we're documenting what those photos are. We don't just want to use a regular ball pen and just write it on the back of the photo because that could damage the photo. But we want to follow good procedures for somehow documenting those photos, whether we scan them, that would be a great way to do it, or we maybe keep a spreadsheet and we number the photos. And again, we use archival quality containers or pens or whatever. But in some way, we document who's in those photos, what was going on, when the photos were taken, that type of thing. And that you can imagine, I've been with people when I've seen tears come to their eyes as they've looked at a photo of a deceased person that they had never seen before. And it just can be such a heart-turning experience. So take advantage of the time that you have and the people who might know information about those photos and do it sooner rather than later. You can do indexing. Indexing is a great way to make historical records available to people so they can find their family in those records. Another really fun one, this was brought up at Roots Tech, is eat food from your ancestral homeland. Google recipes and make recipes from Sweden or from the Netherlands or wherever your ancestors are from. That can be such a fun and bonding experience to taste the foods that your ancestors ate regularly. Hold a family reunion. Probably all of us know what that is, so I won't go into detail, but that can be a very heart-turning experience to get together with your family and share stories and talk about family traditions and such. You can take pictures of grave markers. That's another great way to make information about people available digitally so that people can find their family. Another option is to take classes like you're doing today. Increase your education and your understanding of family history, and you'll find more and more ways to get involved. Okay, I love this question, and I have felt the same way. Probably a lot of you have as well. So when you click a source link in Family Tree, is there a way to know which site has the record and if it's going to cost you before you say, yes, I want to leave the site? So probably most of you have experienced that. In case you haven't, sometimes I click on a source link in Family Tree and it says, you're leaving Family Tree to go to somebody else's website. So I click OK, and then it says, oh, guess what? If you want to look at this record, you have to buy a subscription or you have to pay $20 or whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, great. Thanks. Couldn't you have told me that before I left the site to find out? I got my hopes all up and now I realize that I'm not going to be able to afford that record or I am not going to whatever. It's just not available to me because I choose not to subscribe. So, how can you tell before you get your hopes all up? This is how you can tell. So when you go into somebody's source page, you're going to see several types of icons. One of the icons is a Family Search logo. So the Family Search logo, this cute little tree, indicates that it is a Family Search source. So it is in Family Search historical records, and that is always free. Family Search has said they have never charged for this, they never will. These Family Search records will always be free. So that's your first tip off that you don't have to worry about these, no money involved. But if you see a globe or you see a little square box that looks kind of like a book, and there may be other icons, but those are the two that come to mind. Really, if you see anything that isn't a Family Search logo, then it indicates a non-Family Search source, which may or may not be free. So how do you tell? The easiest way is to open up the source. So you click View Source right here, and then look at the URL. And this one is ancestry.com. So if you have a subscription to ancestry.com, there's a very good chance that you'll be able to see that record without additional cost. The reason I say good chance is that there are different levels of ancestry memberships. So there's like the one that gives you the whole shebang, and it's last time I checked, it was like around $400 or something. Then there's one that gives you almost the whole shebang, and that's a little bit cheaper, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, there are the member accounts for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that give you a large percentage of records, but not all of them. And so the way to tell here is you look at the URL and then you kind of have to know what your personal status is, because one user could come to this link right here and it could be free to them. But another user with a different subscription could come to the very same link and that link would take them to a record that is not free for them. So you just kind of have to know, yes, I'm an Ancestry subscriber. No, I'm not. Or yes, I subscribe to Find My Past, or I have the free account or whatever. So you'll get to know what records have the best chance of being free for you and which ones will not. I'll give you an example there. So for Ancestry, because I do so much family history, I have a paid account. It's not the top level account, it's the next level down, as I recall. So there's some records like newspapers. That's the first one that comes to mind. Is to the best of my memory, not all newspapers are available on lower level accounts, but Ancestry and other sites have done their best to make the most common records available to everybody. So censuses, for example, are available on to the lowest level of user on all websites that I'm aware of. What's another example? Civil registration in countries like England, that's available to even the um, the bottom level or lowest level subscription. So while this isn't absolutely foolproof, at least it gives you a better idea. And for instance, here, if you don't have any kind of Ancestry account, you absolutely know that this you're not going to be able to see um, all the detail on this record for free. So I hope that helps on answer that question where you get a better idea of whether you're going to be asked for money or not when you click a link. Okay, next question. Oh my goodness. Okay. I am surprised at how often this happens. So this person's question said, recently someone added my living mother-in-law to FamilySearch, but she was marked deceased, so everybody could see her and all her personal information. The person didn't say this, but I'm guessing there was probably a birth date or at least a birth year and a birthplace. So that's definitely a breach of privacy, right? And so this person who submitted the question said, I had to contact support and provide proof that she was still alive so that I could have her marked living. How could this happen? That is a very, very good question. So the answer to that is that Family Search is a shared tree, as we were saying at the beginning of this webinar, which means that any user can add anyone. But part of our user agreement that we make when we get a FamilySearch account is that we're going to respect privacy and we're going to follow the guidelines of FamilySearch and so forth. And so FamilySearch's rule is that people that are less than 110 years old should not be marked deceased unless you know they're deceased. So we shouldn't randomly be adding people to the tree and going, oh well, they're probably about 85. I bet they're dead. That could end up being a breach of somebody's privacy. And with identity theft and different things like that, Family Search is very, very careful of privacy. They're very respectful of that. So as users, we need to follow the Family Search guidelines and not add anybody to Family Tree and mark them deceased unless we absolutely know they're deceased or they're older than 110 years old. And when you add somebody to Family Tree, always add sources. So if that person's deceased, add a death source. If you think they might be deceased and you can't find a death record, don't mark them deceased. I did want to comment on one thing right here. This user's experience, she said that she had to contact support and provide proof that her mother-in-law was still alive. So that is one option. But my friend Gordon, who lives in Canada, had this happen to him personally. He got in Family Tree and found out that he had been marked deceased. What he was able to do was he could see the person who had added him and marked him deceased when he was very much alive, and he contacted that person. So if you go in the change log, you can see who added the person. So he clicked the name of the person, got the little pop-up window that lets you contact that person, and then he contacted her and he's all, guess what? I'm not dead. And so she's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize. Here, let me fix that. And because she was the creator of the record, she was able to fix the record. So that is another option. If you find somebody in Family Tree that you know they're marked deceased, but you know they're alive, then you can try contacting the person who made them deceased. But if the person doesn't answer or they're unwilling to communicate with you, unfortunately, sometimes that happens, not often, but sometimes it happens, then definitely contact support and get the person marked living so that their private information isn't available. And just to mention what happened with Gordon when he contacted this person, they ended up having a really good conversation. And at the end, he said, I felt like I made a friend. And the woman ended up being some type of cousin. I don't remember which one, but it was maybe Gordon, if you're on the webinar today, maybe you could throw that in the chat. But anyway, I think she was like, I don't know, a third cousin once removed or something. But he established contact with a family member, which is really cool because they'll be able to possibly collaborate in the future. And now she knows he's not dead. Okay, question number 9. This is such a great question. Okay, this patron wrote into the survey form and said, I understood that memories was a place for photos and documents pertaining to deceased relatives rather than a free storage service. In fact, I've cautioned people about using it as a storage because once a user dies, his or her account would be closed and access to the items in memories would be gone. The but the blog recently encouraged us to use memories as storage, as free cloud storage, is what they said. And her very good question was, why? Okay, let's pull out the two questions, the two specific questions that we want to answer here. The first one is memories meant to be a free photo storage service as a recent blog article implied? But there's another question in there. Are items in memories lost when someone dies and their account is closed? So let's treat both of those questions. So anytime I have a question about memories, I've got a dear friend who, by coincidence, is on the memories team. She's a quality assurance engineer. Her name is Beth Ann. And if you've attended some of our other webinars on memories, you know that she's been incredibly helpful in answering our questions about memories. So I asked her that, and she said, well, not really. And she gave a number of really good reasons why it's not meant to be a free photo storage service in the same sense that what's a name? I can't think of it off the top of my head, but probably a lot of you know. Well, I think one was called Picasso or something. There are a lot of great storage, photo storage options out there. And is Family Search meant to be exactly the same as those other commercial options? They aren't really meant to be the same. And I empathize with the writer of the blog article because probably they were just enthusiastic and they wanted to say, hey, everybody, this is really cool. And they wanted to say something that people would relate to. Well, a lot of us have probably used photo storage services. So we'd go, oh, yeah, okay, I know what you're talking about. But here's the deal in a normal photo storage service, you can upload hundreds, thousands of your photos depending on the level of storage that you pay for. And then if you need those photos down, or maybe your machine crashes and you have another machine that your photos aren't on, you can go download all those photos very easily at once from a photo storage service. Well, Family Search isn't that way, Family Search Memories. Once you upload the memories, you can only get them back one at a time. That in itself would make using Family Search as a photo storage service probably a little unreasonable. It just doesn't offer the features that you would get in a commercial photo storage service. Also, while Family Search has said in the Help Center that they do not limit memories, so you can upload as many as you have, the article also says that you can expect performance to slow down noticeably after about 5,000 memories. So once you start uploading tons and tons of memories and it takes a lot of space, the interface just wasn't built to handle that. And so you'll notice that photos will load more slowly. It'll be more difficult to switch from album to album, that type of thing. So again, another reason why It's not really a photo storage service in the same sense as a commercial service. Then also the purpose is really different. So every memory that you upload, it shouldn't just be uploaded to be stored there, but instead identifying information should be added, a description, a date, what the event was, whatever information about that photo, because it's supposed to be meaningful in terms of family history. And what's interesting as I dug through that article, because again, the blog article, when I first saw it, I just thought to myself, what on earth? How can this be a free photo storage service? Well, as I read through it, then I got to the part where they said, well, really, you're only supposed to upload your best and your most impactful memories. So again, I think they were just very enthusiastic and wanted to draw people in to read the article. But let's take another look at what the Family Search Help Center says about the types of things that we put in memories. We put in things that are appropriate. So they should follow family search standards. That means no nudity, no violence. It's just kind of common sense, right? You don't want to put anything, they should be rated G. That's what appropriate means in terms of family search photos. They should be relevant. They should support a family history purpose. So it isn't just a place to dump all the photos on your phone. They should be heart turning. They should help people know and love their ancestors. They should be non commercial. That kind of goes without saying, right? You don't upload photos that advertise your website or that violate somebody's IP intellectual property rights. And of course, they should respect other people's privacy. So for living people, you should not post a photo of a living person without their permission. It's just safer that way. Family Search recently introduced a feature where you can mark a photo private, and that's helpful, but you can still see it. And Family Search has talked about making family groups where we'll be able to share living memories. And especially in that scenario, you'd want to be respectful of living people and just make sure that it's okay with them. Um, yeah, it's just the polite and kind thing to do. So here's the second question that was raised by the user's original question. Are memories lost when someone dies and their account is closed? The short answer to that is no. But again, it's never quite as simple as just a simple answer. So the fact is, Family Search never deletes memories when somebody dies. And if they have attached titles, descriptions, events, dates, whatever, and especially if they've attached them to people in the shared tree, then users will still be able to see them even after that person passes away. But if the person has not added any titles, descriptions, and has not attached them to anyone in the tree, or they've used the new feature to mark them private, then yeah, the memories are not deleted. They stay there in Family Tree, but nobody can see them. So what's the point, right? So for that reason, always attach your photos to people in Family Tree if possible. Or if they're living people and you want, or maybe they're photos of you and you want them to be visible after you pass away, just be sure that you have attached them, that you've tagged them to yourself and that you've given all the information like titles, descriptions, and so forth so that other people will be able to see them. Now, that being said, do you know what? I just realized I probably gave a bad example there. Because if I tag a photo to myself and then I die, no, do you know what? That would work. Because after I pass away, because I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, then as soon as my ward clerk marks me deceased, then my record would show up in Family Tree and all the memories that I had tagged to myself would show up in Family Tree too. Okay, so the example was okay. Any questions on that, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And if we can't answer them in this webinar, please include, Well, actually, I take that back. I'm going to show my email at the end of the webinar. And if we don't get to your question and you would still like me to answer it, please send me an email. And especially if I can't answer it, I don't know the answer as far as what happens to a memory, I can definitely get in touch with Beth Ann and ask her to answer that question. Okay, question 10. This is kind of a composite question, if you will. Even though on the survey form, we had said, try to keep the questions general. There were still a few questions from people, which I totally get, where they had asked, I'd really, I'm looking for my such and such line in on the early East Coast of the United States, or I'm looking for my relative in Poland, or I'm looking for my relative in this other place in South America. And so I can't answer specific questions on that in this webinar. Number one, because I didn't know the answer, to be honest with you. Those weren't my areas of expertise that people were asking about. But then also to make it more broadly applicable, somebody else watching the webinar right now might be saying, I want to know about my family in Canada or New Zealand or Scotland or wherever. So I'm going to speak in general principles here. If you're looking for records for fill in the blank, whatever place name it is for you to help you find your ancestor, there's two great resources you can try. One is the FamilySearch Wiki, and the other is a free consultation with either the Salt Lake or the BYU Family History Library. So here's a little more information on that. The FamilySearch Wiki, in my estimation, is one of the most amazing tools on the FamilySearch website. It is so complete and so helpful, and they're constantly making it better. In case any of you haven't used the wiki before, it's not a place where you go to find people. It's a place where you go to find information that will help you find people. So here's an example. You get to the wiki by just clicking search and going to Research Wiki. When you get there, the first thing you see is this big search box here, this big search area. And so you just enter the name of the place that you want to find records for. In this example, I want to find records for Warwickshire, England. So I type that in and it gives me all the matches here. And I decide, okay, I'm going to look for online genealogy records. And I click that one. Look what I get. This to me is amazing. So I get a page full of links to relevant information for Warwickshire records. And not only that, in the wiki, to speak to the earlier question that somebody had, they tell you if these images are behind a paywall or not. There were more links on this page. I couldn't even fit them all on because of the size of the screen. But just know that if you go to the wiki, there's a very good chance you're going to get some super helpful information about places you can search, records that you can search for the particular place that you're interested in. The other thing is that since the pandemic, the pandemic's been rough, but do you know what? We have also been showered with blessings, and we've tried things that we might not have ever tried if we hadn't gone through this difficult pandemic experience. So the Salt Lake Library is doing free online consultations, and the way you sign up for them, you can Google Family History Library online research consultations, or this link. It's a live link. And actually, I can ask Bryant to add that to the comment section, or I guess the top section, Bryant, of the YouTube video. And so we can put that link there for your convenience. And then also, the BYU Family History Library offers virtual family history help sessions. Those are also free. And so you can either email this email address right here, or you can call this number. And again, we'll be glad to add that information to the webinar, either the comments or the title. Bryant can answer this question better than I can. But the bottom line is we will provide this information to you so that you can schedule an online consultation if you're interested. So that brings us to the end of the questions on this webinar. And we've got about 5 minutes for any additional questions that people have. Bryant, do you want to read those or should I just open up the Q&A?
You're welcome to just open up the Q&A, Kathryn. I
Okay,
think
glad to
that'd be
do
good.
that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Terrell asks a very good question. Can I see Family Tree on my computer or just phone? You can see them on both. And I'll be honest with you, I like each one for different things. I love the convenience of my phone. What I don't love is how small the screen is. And so I will do some things on my phone because they're fast and easy to do. And then other things, I'm like, forget it. I'm going to wait until I'm in front of my 25-inch monitor where I can actually kind of see what's going on and have two windows next to each other. So yeah, you can do both. If you want to look at Family Tree on your phone, go to your app store, so either to your Apple or your Android app store, and do a search for FamilySearch. And FamilySearch has two apps. They have a tree app and a memories app. And I would download both of them because both of them come in handy. Okay, K.S. Schultz asks, do you recommend that we put separate family trees in the genealogy section? And if so, should we put smaller separate lines instead of one large tree? That is a great question. So the genealogy section, the biggest drawback to it is that it's not editable. So once you upload something, it's just there. It is what it is. Everybody else can see it. It's public. And so the criterion, I guess, for that would be upload something that if you upload it in the way that you feel would be the most use to yourself and to other patrons. And if that's a big tree that shows many generations, go for it. They accommodate that. Or if you want to just do smaller trees so that people can maybe focus more on a particular line, do that. It really comes down to what is the most useful for you and for other patrons. Great question. Okay. Eleanor says that's fine for non-members, but doesn't the church add members' deaths? Eleanor, if I'm understanding your question correctly, you're mentioning that for non-members, the church is not going to add their death information. But for members, do they just mark them deceased or do they actually add death information? To be honest, I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that question. If anybody knows, I mean, really reliably knows, you're either an employee of FamilySearch then, and you know the policy, or maybe somebody in your family just died and you worked with the ward clerk to mark them deceased, and you either know that the death date is included by the ward clerk or is not included and eventually makes it into, eventually either does or doesn't make it into family tree. Maybe you could comment on that, but I do not know the answer to that. So I appreciate that question. We'll have to try and find out an answer. Okay, another question from K.S. Schultz. Is there an easier way to get to places on the toolbar or pull down menus other than just having to remember the URL? Not that I'm aware of. I've actually never seen it, but you know what? I'm always hesitant on stuff like that because number one, they're constantly improving the family search menus. And then number two, I might have just missed it. So you know what? That's making me really curious. What time is it? Okay, we've got 2 minutes. Let me just get out of here and go over to Family Tree and just kind of look at the menu really quickly and see if there's any. Okay, I've got to drag the Zoom thing out of the way. It's not moving. There we go. So family tree, it's not on family tree. Search, we've got images, we've got, I'm not seeing it there. I would have thought it would most likely be on search. But do you know what else I can do, you guys, that would make it easier? Let's see, it was familysearch.org and then it was research, and there it is, places. Let me just go ahead and throw that in the chat. And so for those of you who would like to bookmark it, you can click it in the chat and just bookmark it and you will have it. Okay. Yeah, because I agree. It's not always the easiest to remember those long URLs, right? Okay, back to the Q&A. Daryl says, we can make corrections on Family Tree because there are many errors. That is a very good point. That's a reason that FamilySearch allows Family Tree to be editable, because they want us all to collaborate and correct the errors and make it the best tree possible. So let's see, how are we? We're at the hour. I'm going to try and squeeze in 3 more questions really quickly. Terrell, you said, can I put the app on my computer? You can if you have a mobile device emulator. If you have never used one before, the answer to that is no. Software developers use those. And so there is a way to view mobile apps on a computer, but it's not usually the kind of thing that most users would do. So Terrell also asked about the living person marked dead. I had 2 aunts. They both had headstones in the cemetery with their names on them, and they're still alive. A well-meaning relative marked them deceased. Terrell, that's such a good thing to remember for all of us, that just because a name is on a tombstone doesn't mean they're dead, because the same thing is true of my aunt. Her husband is dead and she's not, but they're on a joint tombstone together. So before you assume somebody is dead based on a tombstone, make sure there's a death here. And Daryl says, when will they reopen the family history centers that have been closed because of the pandemic? I do not know. And I wish I did, and I hope they open soon. And last question from Charlene. She says, over the years, we've had several family reunions. One was in Tahoe, and we did each individual aunt and uncle's group photos. Can we add them to each family that attended? And should we ask before we put them on the person page? Charlene, such a good question. And again, out of respect for those people, I would definitely get permission for any living person before you made them visible in Family Tree. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. And let me go ahead and um, let me go back into presenter mode. Well, you guys can probably see that, right? My email is right there, kathryn@gmail.com. And so if we weren't able to get to your question today due to time constraints, please do feel free to email me, and I'll be glad to answer that question by email. Or I'm also glad to uh, put it in the next Q&A session that we have. So thanks so much, you guys. And Bryant, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kathryn. And let me just share my screen.
Super.
Awesome. Be sure to join us next week at the same time, Wednesday, 5:30 p.m. on April 7th for another webinar with Kathryn Grant. And I'm not sure if you're thinking of continuing the Q&A session, Kathryn. Maybe we can talk about that afterwards. But
Yeah, let's talk about it, because I actually had another thing in mind. So yeah, but we'll definitely do another Q&A webinar sometime, hopefully
awesome.
pretty soon. Thanks, Bryant.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. As always, a recording of this webinar will be uploaded to YouTube and our website within the next couple days. So be sure to look out for it there. And thanks for joining us, and we hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.